We've just taken a cruise that we weren't sure if we'd enjoy, and at our advanced stages it was for a very unusual reason. For years we've wanted to incorporate a cruise into our regular visits to New York, and this cruise, combined with Michael's love of photography during the autumn foliage seasons, seemed to fit the bill. We loved the look of the port-heavy itinerary with 6 ports in Canada and 4 in the USA, ending in New York, and the time of year was perfect for us. But we also knew that Oceania tends to have an older set of passengers, and while we aren't spring chickens ourselves, we wondered if we would feel too young. Welcome to Linky Lifestyle. I'm Mardi and I've been travelling for over 20 years with my husband Michael, so we love to share our expertise with you to help you plan holidays that aren't just fun but truly unforgettable. We know, of course, that people of all ages can talk and socialise together without problems, so we were hopeful we would still find our groove on the ship. We've experienced a variety of cruise lines and always found them enjoyable in different ways. We'd also been reading up on the cruise line and ship, as well as watching YouTube videos, and there were 2 complaints that we saw over and over again. One was that the standard cabins had a bathroom that is so minute that a normal-sized human can't use the shower properly, and the other was that the food is bland and under-seasoned due to the health problems of the older-aged passengers. So we knew that the cruise might go very wrong for us if we didn't enjoy the activities, the food or our cabin. This was an 11-night cruise. That's a long time to be unable to shower properly or eat food you don't like. We chose the earliest boarding time when we checked in so we could leave our hotel and go straight to the ship. We were staying near the Montreal cruise terminal, which was just a short taxi ride away. When we got to port, there were 2 identical ships, Insignia and her sister ship Nautica. Luckily, our taxi driver knew which ship we wanted and took us to the right one. I hadn't realised I'd need to show our passports when we arrived at the port, and they were in the boot of the taxi. That's the trunk for all you North Americans. I hopped out and retrieved them and we were waved onto the luggage drop. It all happened really quickly then, jumping out of the taxi and handing over our suitcases to the baggage handlers. To our surprise, they didn't look like they were waiting for a tip, which was lucky because I'd stuffed up when packing and forgotten to bring a card to get cash from an ATM. More on that later. Left on our own, we wandered into the cruise terminal wondering where to go. We walked up to a table with cruise terminal staff standing at it, and a helpful lady took us to the long check-in line and explained that everyone turns up at the start of boarding because they want to get on board and start eating all the free food. Since we were there at the time we'd selected, we felt a bit annoyed, but I can sympathise. We always like to get on for lunch on embarkation day. After all, you're paying for that day, right? Day 1 of your cruise. We talked to the couple in front of us briefly and then spent more time talking to the couple behind us as we wound our way through the terminal. Hi Jim and Bonnie, I hope you enjoyed your 60th wedding anniversary cruise. We ran into Jim and Bonnie quite a few times during our cruise and we're even on the same bus as them to Peggy's Cove, the tour we did from Halifax. It only took about an hour to get on board, but we thought we might be sent to the naughty corner when we were asked for paper copies of our ESTAs, the visa waiver document that allows us to enter the USA. Of course, we'd entered the USA a few days before, flying into JFK Airport for our transit to Canada. At airports they can see your ESTA attached to your passport electronically, so you don't need to print it. But more on that later. We boarded on deck 5 and we knew our cabin was on deck 6, but cabins wouldn't be ready for a few hours yet. Who else feels a bit lost when boarding an unfamiliar ship? I have a rule that to start finding our way, we always make our first destination our muster station, which on this ship was in the Insignia Lounge. If in doubt when you first board, head to your muster station. It was only steps away from where we boarded, so that was easy, and we'd already watched the safety video. Oceania Insignia launched in 1998, which means she was 26 years old when we boarded. Renaissance Cruises owned her until 2001 when they went bankrupt, and her original name was R1. Boring. She's an R-class ship and Renaissance had 8 of them, which were called, wait for it, you'll never guess, R1, R2, R3, and so on up to R8. Oceania now own the original R1, R2, R4 and R5 ships, and their much nicer and more friendly names are Insignia, Regatta, Sirena and Nautica respectively. Azamara has the other 4, although all 8 ships bounced around a few other owners before landing with Oceania and Azamara. Insignia holds 698 passengers and 400 crew, which is an excellent crew to passenger ratio, but more on that later. She was heavily refurbished in 2019 and while keeping a classic style has been brought up to date in many ways. ways. We found the Terrace Cafe, which is the buffet restaurant at the aft of level 9. As you'd expect, being embarkation day, it was crammed, but luckily the weather wasn't too cold. Okay, this is Canada in late October, so it was cold, but at least it was sunny. So we had to sit out on the aft deck. We went inside and got some food, a slice of prime rib each and some sides, and went to eat. This was a disappointing first experience of the food that is supposed to be the finest cuisine at sea, TM. We couldn't cut the prime rib. Either the knives were blunt or the meat was sinewy. I don't really know which because we just ate the sides and gave up on the meat. I had my first cocktail of approximately 1,708 during the cruise, a Kir Royale. Are you really cruising if there aren't cocktails involved? I don't think I am. The atmosphere all over the ship was fairly lively, but that's pretty usual on embarkation day with everyone excited about starting out on a new journey. By now we were cold from sitting outside, so we headed for Barista's Cafe to get warm drinks. We settled down in what would come to be our table. We were really happy and excited to find that Baristas provided delicious hot chocolates and they were included in our drinks package. Neither of us drink coffee, so a hot chocolate is our indulgent warm beverage of choice, and one of our priorities on any cruise is to find out where to get them. We ended having many hot chocolates here over the course of the cruise and got to know the barista, Tony from the Philippines, or rather he got to know us and would bring us hot chocolates automatically after the first day or so. Insignia has one large main dining room called the Grand Dining Room, plus 2 specialty restaurants and the Terrace Cafe and the Waves Grill, which serves burgers, hot dogs and sandwiches. I knew that formal dress isn't required on Oceania ships, but I was wondering if people would still be dressing up and we'd stand out like badly dressed youngsters in our limited holiday wardrobe. Our cabin became available about 3 p.m, so we headed up to unpack and meet our wonderful room steward, Arnaldo from the Philippines. The refurbished cabin was lovely and looked modern and stylish. There were plenty of power outlets, even next to the bed, unusually for such an old ship, but the things I'd read about the bathroom were right. It was tiny. Next to the bed we had 1 European power outlet and 1 USB-A. We felt at home straight away after unpacking and headed out for the sail away. What do you like to do for sail away? Insignia didn't have a loud party on the pool deck or any sail away event for that matter, but we always avoid those and we prefer to find a good high vantage point to farewell our embarkation city. Montreal in October is a pretty chilly place. When we got up on deck it was -3 degrees Celsius, which is about 27 degrees Fahrenheit. Not to worry, we were rugged up and had a couple of cocktails from the Waves bar to hold on to, although I needed gloves to hold my icy pina colada. The only other people up there were a few hardy souls who, like us, wanted to farewell Montreal and film the sail away down the St. Lawrence River. When we boarded, we didn't have printed copies of our ESTAs, so we were told to go to guest services to get an email address where we could send them. After sail away we did that and I sent them off, quickly getting a response to say they'd been received, so we knew we wouldn't be walking the plank on this occasion. We hadn't had much lunch, so after a few cocktails, we had dinner in the Grand Dining Room. I had lobster bisque and herb-crusted roast chicken, which came with bones in it to my horror. I really dislike cutting chicken meat off bones. The food was nice though, not particularly bland, unlike what I'd heard earlier. I can't say I found the food to be exceptional, but we've eaten in a lot of world-class restaurants on our travels. On the other hand, we aren't food snobs. Macca's, or McDonald's to the non-Australians, is one of our favourite meals. The most memorable thing about that meal was that when we got up and left, I left my cardi behind on my chair and another passenger had to chase me down with it. At this point we realised that we would have to go through a number of time zone changes, which was a surprise because we thought we were travelling north to south, not west to east. But when you see our itinerary map, it shows that we actually did go west to east and then back again. In fact, you can see that New York isn't that far from Montreal and in the same time zone. We spent 11 days travelling in a big arrowhead northwest to get out of Canada and then back southeast to the US. I counted up in the daily currents and the clocks went forward twice for a total of 90 minutes and then back 3 times for a total of 2.5 hours, which included the end of daylight saving time. But right then I didn't realise what the time changes would do to us. Are you enjoying this? We're working on our cruise and hotel review formats to make them more interesting. We'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe. It costs you nothing and it really helps us. You may not realise, but we don't get payment for the ads you see during our videos. We need to get to 1,000 subscribers and a certain number of view hours to get payments from YouTube. We're just over halfway there and it would be amazing to get paid, even just a small amount for all our hard work on this channel. We We were worried that the shows on Insignia wouldn't be entertaining or suit us, and had decided that if we didn't enjoy them, we would find our own thing to do. We knew they didn't do big Broadway-style productions, but we didn't know whether they'd have anything we'd enjoy. However, the show on the first night was actually Broadway in concert. We went along and it was great. Well-known Broadway tunes sung by the 4 vocalists, Josh, Cortez, Chloe and Dijana, and with dancing by the 2 dancers, Kai and Lois. The 6 of them interacting with each other beautifully. The cruise director, Carson, was great and added a lot of energy to the activities on board. He even did a show of his own one night. Insignia is very easy to get around. I usually don't know which way is port and which way is starboard unless I look for a directions board, but it wasn't a problem on this ship. The lifts face the front of the ship, so when I got out I always knew that I was facing front and to go right to starboard locations, including our cabin. We call elevators lifts in Australia. It's so much easier. You may notice that we Australians are lazy speakers and often use shorter words or shorten the actual word, cardi instead of cardigan, Macca's instead of McDonald's. And the main common areas we used were easy to find once I'd memorised which were fore and which were aft. The Insignia Lounge and Horizons Lounge were fore, and the grand dining room with Barista's Cafe next to it, Terrace Cafe and the specialty restaurants were aft. But on decks 9 and 10 the layout got a bit quirky. To get to the aft we had to walk in the open around the pool or along the walking track if we caught the fore elevators, which were the ones closest to our cabin. I don't mind walking in the open in good weather, but there were times on this cruise when the weather was cold, wet and windy, so we had to remember to get the lift from the right end of the ship. And from Horizons, to go to the public toilets on that deck, we had to walk along the open walking track to the specialty restaurant area. One freezing cold day, I opted to take the lift down to our cabin instead of going outside. We knew that afternoon tea was held in the Horizons Lounge on deck 10 each day, and we had to try it. Afternoon tea is one of our favourite things, so if it's happening, we'll find it. We had to get there early to get a seat at the front overlooking the bow of the ship. The view was amazing. It's so exciting and calming all at once to be looking out over the ocean as you sip tea and eat delicacies. At 4 p.m, waiters started bringing around a wooden box with a selection of tea bags. I chose English breakfast, of course. I'm not into flavoured teas. I like the plain stuff. I made our tea for us. Neither of us likes our tea overbrewed, so I dingle-dangled the bag in the pot 8 or 9 times, then whipped it out. Perfect. Into the cup and a dab of milk and I'm happy. Then they brought around sandwiches and they were delicious. After that came small cakes and pastries. I prefer the sandwiches to the cakes when I have afternoon tea. Comment below with your favourite afternoon tea treat. But we realised something was missing. Everything had been delicious, but there were no scones. Surely afternoon tea wouldn't be served without scones. I went looking and found that because we had our back turned to the lounge, we'd missed a big table of all sorts of goodies, more cakes and sandwiches, but there was still no scones. Not wanting to miss an opportunity, I selected some food for us and asked one of the crew if there were scones. She directed me around the corner behind the bar. After I took the loaded plate back to Michael, I went to where she'd pointed, and sure enough there was another crew member there dispensing scones, jam and cream. There were plain scones and sultana scones. No thanks. Plain for us every time. Once we finished our scones and had put on a few extra kilos, we heaved ourselves out of the Horizons Lounge and went to trivia. What's a cruise without trivia? And we discovered that if you win, Oceania doesn't give you silly trinkets like key rings, but more on that later. On our first morning we had breakfast in the Terrace Cafe. The food was nice but not amazing, but it was easy to get a seat, not like lunch on embarkation day. We discovered during our cruise that the staff here are very attentive and that there are always some made-to-order items such as steak and chops at dinner, salad at lunch and eggs at breakfast. I had a fantastic Caesar salad one day. It was made the way I like it with plenty of anchovies. They would always offer us still or sparkling water and a drink from the bar as soon as we sat down. Service on board was amazing. The crew all appeared happy and smiling, were interested in chatting to us and never failed to offer a drink when we were dining in any of the locations. The crew to passenger ratio usually reflects the level of service. On this ship it was 698 to 400, or 1 crew for every 1 3/4 guests. Obviously not all the crew are the ones assisting the passengers. They do need people to do the laundry, maintain the engines and other services, and steer the ship, but it's still an indicator of what you can expect. On our cruise in Terrace Cafe, the crew was serving all the food, but I have heard that Oceania now has self-service in the Terrace Cafe. While I prefer self-service, being autistic, the environment is a sensory overload for me and I feel unable to communicate about what I want and how much. I'm concerned that there are no hand washing stations at the entrances. I'm happy to use Sani, that's Australian for hand sanitizer, but it isn't effective against norovirus. To deal with that you need soap and water. Washy washy. This was a great cruise for the ports we visited. visited. Being a smaller ship, we visited smaller towns and docked in all but one, and it was easy to walk off the ship and into the town. There was a shuttle at one port, which we caught because it was cold, wet and windy, but the port was so close we walked back when we finished exploring. There was only one sea day on this cruise, and we only did shore excursions in 3 ports. Many of the ports were small towns with little of interest. Sorry, Canada. And while we're happy we got off and had a look around, if we did this cruise again, we'd probably stay on board for some of those and treat them as sea days. As it was, apart from Halifax, Boston and Newport, we were usually only off the ship for 2 or 3 hours and always back in time for our afternoon hot chocolate appointment in Baristas. Something we loved about Oceania is that specialty restaurants don't have an extra charge, and when your booking window opens up depends on your cabin and status. So since we were right at the bottom of the ladder, I was worried we might miss out. Once on board, if there's capacity, you can book as many dinners as you'd like. More on the specialty restaurants later. Our favourite activity each day was trivia, and I don't think we missed a single one. The questions were really challenging, and even me, known in my former workplace as the trivia queen, found it hard to answer a lot of them. Despite this, and despite being a team of only 2 against teams of up to 8, we managed to win or place 2nd or 3rd quite a few times. People would come up to us and ask us how we did it. I hope they didn't think we were cheating, although we were all marking our own answers, so who knows. Maybe it's the thing to do. But we didn't, and we loved that the prizes were O points. O points are given for certain activities, and you can collect them to buy things at the end of the cruise. That's so much better than a keyring. Although, you could actually buy keyrings with your points if you wanted to. We could buy our prizes at the end, so more on that later. We also enjoyed the daily Mensa quizzes. Each day a sheet of questions would be handed out, and if you got 5 out of 5 correct, you'd get another O point. This was an honour system too, so I made sure Michael and I did ours separately and only talked through it together afterwards. It was cold on this cruise, but this would change later. Inside the ship was always warm and toasty, but if we had to cross the pool deck or walking track to Horizons or a specialty restaurant, you could feel winter in the wind. About this time, we realised we were almost the youngest on board, and since we were 56 and 58 at that time, that was a novel feeling. We also seemed to be the only ones not from North America. It was mainly people from the USA, but we did meet a few Canadians. Each night with the Currents daily program, we'd also get a 4-page newspaper specially printed for Australians. It was great fun, especially because the news chosen was really random, and also I'd already seen most of it through following our national broadcaster ABC on X. We had a ritual where I'd read the news out to Michael in funny voices and put in my own comments like, "Oh, sport, boring, not reading that," or "Ugh, politics, do you really want to know?" We've been asked why we flew all the way to Montreal to take a cruise. It was over 30 hours of travel from home to our hotel. And the answer is that we love New York City and spend time there nearly every year. So by taking a cruise that disembarked in New York, we could have the best of both worlds, a cruise and New York. And I hadn't been to Canada before, so it was great to see a variety of ports there. Those killer time changes going forward were harder than you'd think. I don't like getting up early when I'm on holiday, so we missed breakfast pretty much every day, except a couple of days when we had early shore excursions booked, when we'd order room service. Room service was great and free to all passengers. I'd even call up for a cup of tea at night before bed. I'm surprised, looking back, that there were actually only 2 time changes forward. I felt like there was one nearly every day. Going back in time was better, of course, and we went back an hour further over the entire cruise, even though Montreal and New York are in the same time zone, because daylight saving ended at some point. It's quite surreal when the time is changing daily, and we had to look at the cabin TV clock every morning to make sure we had the right time. And if we had to set an alarm to get up, we'd have to hedge our bets and set 2 or 3 in case our phones changed time overnight, or didn't, as the case may be. Possibly the worst thing about this cruise was braving the upended coffin they call a shower each morning. On days I didn't have to wash my hair, it was bearable, but if I had to spend time with my arms over my head, I'd get very sick of my elbows banging into the walls. And forget about picking up something you dropped. I'd have to grab it with my toes, flick it up and catch it. But if that's my only complaint, I still think it was a great cruise. Most afternoons we followed a routine of sitting in Baristas. I'd do some work on this channel while Michael read a book. He reads really slowly due to his eyesight, and he never has time to read a complete book without losing track of the plot, so this is a true luxury for him. We'd have hot chocolates and then some days go to afternoon tea, but we had to restrict this so we wouldn't have to be craned off the ship at the end. Baristas changed to the Grand Bar at 6 p.m, so then we'd switch drinks. My favourite cocktail was Desdemona, but I also enjoyed an English affair. Michael enjoyed many double monkey shoulder whiskies. We loved that we didn't have a fixed time or need to make a reservation for our dinner each night, other than the specialty restaurants. The grand dining room, which was entered through baristas, opened at 6 p.m. most nights, and we were amused by seeing people start to line up well before it opened. We always wondered why they were so desperate to get in. We'd wait an hour or two until there was no line and just walk up and be seated at once. We liked dining late on holiday, so that suited us. The grand dining room, baristas and the Insignia lounge were on deck 5, and our cabin was on deck 6, actually above the Insignia lounge. Before we boarded, we wondered if there'd be a noise problem, but more on this later. Everything was so convenient on this small ship, and it was easy to go back to our cabin quickly to change or drop off my laptop. From our 4 lift, to get to baristas or the grand dining room, we'd have to walk through the casino and Martini's bar. Martini's was always completely full before dinner and before the shows, which were usually at 9 p.m. A few times we went in looking for a seat and there was nothing, but we could always find a seat in baristas. I also avoided Martini's because for some reason it was hot in there. Horizons was a bar and nightclub in the evenings, but we never went there for anything other than afternoon tea and breakfast one morning. They just had pastries and tea and coffee. After the show, we'd go back to our cabin, have a cup of tea and read the currents for the next day, read the Australian newspaper and go to bed. Who said we were too young for this cruise? We'd been worried that there would be noise in our cabin due to it being directly above the Insignia lounge. We only heard noise from there twice, once in the afternoon when they must have been rehearsing for a show, and on Halloween when there was an ABBA night. Because we'd been to a speciality restaurant and the show was Halloween themed, yes, Halloween and ABBA, who would have put them together? It was popular, so we were late and couldn't get a seat. We went back to our cabin and for a little while we could hear the music, but we weren't ready to sleep, so it didn't bother us. The shows always finished by about 10:30 at the latest. Walking through the casino, on one side there was an artwork that I didn't like. It looked like a wall of ears, so I'd usually go the slightly longer way around to avoid it. Michael found this out about halfway through the cruise, and if he was first out of the lift, he'd always go past it to annoy me. Yes, we usually took the lift. I have problem knees, particularly going downstairs, and I try to baby them so they won't give up on me. We found the food in the grand dining room to be mostly enjoyable and not too bland. I'm not a big fan of extra spicy food anyway, but I do appreciate well seasoned food. I enjoyed it all, even the roast chicken on the bone I had on the first evening. I don't enjoy buffets, so we only had dinner in the Terrace Cafe a couple of times. We had breakfast in the grand dining room once and lunch once too. Both were great. The waiter poured me a glass of wine with my lunch. I usually don't day drink, but it would have been rude not to, right? The first speciality restaurant we went to was the Polo Grill. I had oysters Rockefeller followed by surf and turf. I think a dinner of oysters and steak has to be my all-time favourite meal. Michael had lobster bisque. He said it was the same as the one in the grand dining room, except it had chunks of lobster in it. Followed by the most ridiculously huge piece of meat I've ever seen served to a single person. The King's Cut prime rib. I helped him eat it and we both struggled. The food was excellent and we thought we might try to come back. A couple of nights later we went to Toscana. We just loved it. I had caprese for a starter and aragosta fra diavolo con taglioni. Lobster with taglioni, garlic, chili, parsley and tomato sauce. Amazing. Michael had fritto di calamari to start with, then risotto al aragosta, risotto with lobster. Do you like my Italian accent? He liked it, but he would have preferred mine. No chance. But we would definitely go back. We made 2 specialty restaurant bookings before our cruise started, despite my fears of missing out. We chose to visit fairly early on in the cruise so we could go back if we wanted to experience them again. And we did. So next time we passed the reservations desk, we got another booking for Toscana. Walking around the ship and in our cabin, it seemed to be in perfect condition. It had a major refurbishment just before COVID, so that helps. But the crew obviously take pride in the ship and keep her looking her best. One strange thing, and an artefact of a bygone age perhaps, was that we had a bottle opener attached to the bathroom door frame. Who else has seen this on a cruise ship? And speaking of strange things, we found that at evening turn down, our cabin steward would put a mat on the floor next to the bed. It was like a tea towel, not a woolly rug, but a cloth mat. We had no idea what this was for and we never found out. If you have any ideas about this, comment below. Another place we enjoyed eating was the Waves Grill. I had the Texan burger once, but with tomato instead of barbecue sauce. It's basically a cheeseburger. But other than that, the classic hot dog was usually my go-to. And Michael loved the Wagyu burger with lobster on it. I'm getting really hungry right now. Almost as soon as we crossed from Canada to the US, the weather warmed up. From freezing cold and rugged up in Canada to a summer dress and sandals in Boston, where I got too hot walking around. It was quite surreal. I talked about packing for this trip in another video, I'll link it below, and the changing climate during the trip made it quite the challenge. Although I expected the warm weather to be when we hit Bermuda, not in New England in the fall. We did an Oceania walking tour in Quebec City, and that was the coldest we'd felt for a long time. Fully rugged up, gloves, scarves, 2 coats and multiple layers, and we still had to defrost with hot chocolate so we could spend some more time on land. The other Oceania excursion we did was in Halifax, and we went to Peggy's Cove. It's beautiful out there, but the wind was icy cold. Not surprising when you look at it on the map. It's close to where the Titanic sank, and we all know she hit an iceberg. We finally got a chance to try lobster roll in Halifax too. In Newport, we'd booked a tour at the Breakers, the Vanderbilt summer home. The scale of it is incredible, particularly when you think they spent just a few months of the year here. It was another warm day out and the only tender port. Watch out for your hair when tendering. Michael likes to do a bit of gambling in the casino, but he prefers craps and they didn't have a craps table. He'll play roulette if there's a table with people on it, but doesn't like being the only one playing. The casino was very quiet on this cruise, so we never stopped there. There were usually people on the slots, but that's not our thing. Going back to Toscana, we had the same great experience, including the olive oil and balsamic vinegar cart. A crew member brings a cart with oils and vinegars and describes them in terms you'd usually hear for wine. We made our selections and then dipped bread from the amazing bread basket into our concoction. It was unbelievably good, and I don't even like bread all that much. This time Michael had the carpaccio di manzo, beef carpaccio, for starter, and his main was the one I had the first time. I couldn't go past my first experience and repeated both my choices. No regrets. On the last full day, the O Prizes shop was open for business. A number of points was allocated as the price of various items. I thought I had a list to put on the screen, but it seems I don't, sorry. It ranged from things like key rings for just a few points up to 30 points for an Oceania windbreaker. We had 27 points, and the first step was to line up, hand over your points, and say how many there were so someone could write that number on a slip of paper. I was cheeky and said, "We have 27, but you can round that up to 30 if you like." The crew member said, "I heard 30. So that's the number we got in our slip of paper. We decided to buy the Oceania windbreaker for Michael. He found it really useful during the rest of our trip for days in New York that were damp but not freezing cold. Now let's look at what we paid. There's a mixture of Australian and US dollars here, so I'll put both versions of everything I mentioned on screen. Our fare for a B2 balcony cabin was 9,980 Australian dollars per person, on special reduced from 11,980 when we booked. After booking, we saw 2 further reductions. The first was before we'd made final payment, so I asked them to reduce our fare and they did it. That was $2,780 per person less, taking it to $7,200. The second was after final payment. They wouldn't reduce the fare again and give us a refund, but instead they provided non-refundable onboard credit of 606 Australian dollars per person. We bought the premium beverage package for $479 Australian per person. That was $30 US per person per day. We booked under the short-lived Simply More inclusions program and received shore excursion credit that covered both our excursions with a few dollars to spare. Once on board, we both upgraded to streaming Wi-Fi. It's hard to manage a YouTube channel and associated social media without streaming, to the extent that without streaming Wi-Fi, I couldn't even use the YouTube Studio app to check our stats, and that's not even streaming. So that cost us an extra $209.79 US for both. We upgraded on different days, so one cost a bit more than the other. They refunded the original package cost that had been included in our Simply More inclusions. Once on board, we discovered that although we had paid for our beverage package upfront by credit card prior to the cruise, the payment was in our account as refundable onboard credit, which worked out really well if you know the story of how I forgot to take the card that allows us to withdraw money from overseas ATMs when I was packing. We received shareholder benefit onboard credit of $100 US too. Our total onboard account credits were $2,211.74 US, which was $655.78 refundable for prepaying the beverage package, and $1,555.96 non-refundable for our Simply More excursion credit, the fare drop onboard credit, refund for the basic internet packages we replaced, and the shareholder credit. We used all except $62.17 of our non-refundable credit. I'm I'm still kicking myself for not indulging in some perfume in the boutique, and $24 of our shore excursion credit. We had $655.78 refunded to us in cash. This gave us some spending money in New York. Since I'd forgotten to bring a card for ATM withdrawals, this was a lifesaver. In total, we paid $9,265 US or $13,426 Australian. Reverting to Australian here, that's $7,211 each or $656 per person per day. I call that a pretty good price for a cruise that included all food and specialty restaurants, all drinks including many cocktails each evening, and expensive Scotch whisky for Michael, afternoon tea every day, and a perfectly maintained ship and a spotless room, or cabin, sorry. Not to mention the 2 Oceania excursions we went on, both of which were lots of fun. I'm not sure we're Oceania's target market. We were certainly the youngest by almost a decade on this cruise, I'd guess, but we loved it and we felt very comfortable on board and would love to return to Oceania soon. We're very glad we did this. I've spotted a 24-day cruise from Perth to Auckland next month on Insignia, but sadly, Michael doesn't have endless annual leave, so that won't be happening. We'll see Oceania again another day soon, hopefully. Has this put you in the mood for your next cruise? To learn cruise cabin etiquette, click here. And to find out more about cruise ship drink packages, click here. Bye for now.